So what would it mean if you had a courageous culture? You know, a culture that employees actually want to join? Well, today we're going to answer that question, how to build it, and some more great stuff with the authors of the new book, Courageous Cultures, Karin and David Dye. They're the founders of Let's Grow Leaders, a leadership training and consulting firm in Maryland. They've recently been named on Inc.'s list of top 100 leadership speakers to watch. 100 leadership speakers, and one of the AMA is 50 leaders to watch. Holy crap, I just totally skipped that sentence because that's freaking awesome. Karin and David, they work with leaders around the world who want to achieve breakthrough results without losing their soul or their mind in the process. They're known for their deep experience, innovative approach, and highly practical tools. They're a lot of fun, super smart, and actually do what they talk about. So what's up, gang? It's good to see you, my friends.
Well, thank you so much for having us, Phil.
Yeah, I'm jacked that you're here. So, David, is that a courageous cultures in your pocket, or are you just happy to see me?
Well, yes, it is both.
Awesome. So cool. So you know, your company does all this stuff, but where did you get the genesis of the courageous cultures idea that you'd now burst forth in the world?
Yeah. So Phil, it was really interesting. For the last couple of years, we've been noticing a pattern as we were working with a lot of our clients, and we would go into the senior level of the organization and we would hear people saying things like, you know, why don't people bring more ideas? Why don't people speak up? Why am I the one that has to do some walking around and discover this best practice? Why aren't people sharing? And then we would go in to do training or focus groups at the very front line of these same organizations. And we would hear things like, I don't know why I speak up. Nothing ever happens. Last time I spoke up, I got in trouble. Why bother? Or, you know, whenever I bring an idea forward, my boss takes the credit for it. I thought, wow, are you working in the same company? So employees have ideas. Leaders want to hear them, and somehow there was a disconnect.
So we partnered with the University of Northern Colorado to do some research and figure out why does that gap exist and what do great companies do and great leaders do to overcome it. And then the other reason that we wrote the book was as we were looking at the future of work and what's happening in the world, and this has only been accelerated through COVID and everything else that's happening, is that, you know, with artificial intelligence and the commodification of so many competitive advantages, that ultimately your number one competitive advantage that you have are your people, and the extent to which you can get every voice contributing on behalf of the customer experience, building a better employee experience. And it takes every single person to do that. We've long ago left the days where any one leader is going to be able to do that. So we wanted to help leaders with a practical roadmap to build that kind of culture of consistent contribution and really tap into and leverage everything that they've got in their people.
Yeah, good. Well, I love that. I think that's super important. I agree. Never before has it been more obvious with this distributed workforce that we're all working from home, that the future of work is definitely distributed as well, where everyone must contribute or the organization is not going to thrive. So I love that your number one competitive advantage, of course, is your people. But yet I think some organizations still don't get it, right? Some organizations are still thinking, well, maybe if I just pour more into research or I just sell more, that's going to help. So what are some of the pitfalls, before we get into how to build this, what are some of the pitfalls that companies make before they even get started along this journey?
You know, the real big challenge that we found is that people think they are asking for ideas. And so they'll say, you know, well, we have an open door policy. Or I'm constantly asking people, what ideas do you have to improve the business? And the challenge is having an open door. The problem with that is it still takes courage to walk through that open door. And if you do not have a psychologically safe culture, that is a challenge. And the problem with just saying, hey, what ideas do you have, is that feels very overwhelming. Well, gee, I have a lot of ideas. But if you can be very specific and clear, not only that you want ideas, but what a great idea would accomplish. So I need ideas right now on how we can be more productive and more effective while working from home. Now that's a very specific idea. And if you ask me that in that way, oh yeah, well, I certainly have been thinking about that. I have ideas. So that's the number one pitfall.
Yeah, that just not asking for what you need. That definitely is
49% of the folks in our research said the reason they're not sharing ideas, and the ideas they weren't sharing, by the way, were how to improve the customer experience, the employee experience, or productivity in the process. 49% said the reason they weren't sharing is that no one asked.
And then once you've got ideas, another pitfall that we see is people either not responding to those ideas, and they might even be using them in some cases. I'll tell you about that later, but they might be using them, but they're not going back and responding, or they're responding poorly. So failure to respond well to the ideas you are getting, puts a wet blanket over any more.
Yeah, so 50% of the folks in the research said the reason that they don't share ideas is that nothing ever happens with their idea, and that's a failure to respond. And then 40% said they lack the confidence to share, and so that's another pitfall because you're not creating a safe enough environment. And part of what we have found is that people say, well, I am a great leader, right? I have never done anything that should have caused fear and intimidation. And that might very well be true. But the chances are that in the past, they have had a boss who either led with fear and intimidation, did some shaming, or shut down their ideas, or stole the credit for ideas. And the research shows us that people tend to hold on to those negative experiences, even if they've had subsequent positive experiences.
Yeah, there's so much human psychology that goes into this. People will default to safe silence. And that's the default. And so leaders, you have to do something intentional to change that.
Wow. That's so interesting. The default is safe silence. That makes sense though, right? If we think about that, just saying nothing, well, keep your head down, do your work. That's enough. That's all that's expected of me, right?
Right.
Not really, right? We should be brave. We should have that. And so you talk about the 3 reasons that instills that they don't feel safe, right? You said fear, which is interesting, right? And maybe past fear, maybe current fear, shame. But then you said one that I had not thought of. And I think that's really interesting. And that is, you had a boss who stole the credit. And I can tell you, I've absolutely had bosses like that. And I hated that. And that absolutely shut me down. So talk to us a little bit more about that credit stealer and how we can go drive back to that old boss in our past and punch him in the face.
So you're not alone. 56% of the people in our research said the reason they are not sharing their good ideas is because they're afraid that they won't get the credit, which that was probably the most surprising thing.
It was shocking. Of all the different options of reasons why you might not share something, that was the one that was cited most frequently as well. I'm not going to get credit. And so as a leader, being aware of that tendency is there. And, you're not going to be able to go back and punch your credit stealing boss in the face, unfortunately. But as a leader, how do you change that dynamic? How do you ensure that that's happening? And so, we give leaders really practical ways to go about that and prevent that from happening, because it is definitely in our psyche that it's a fear that it's going to happen.
Sure. Well, of course. That makes sense, right? That means that our idea got stolen, it got implemented. I didn't get the credit, which means I got to work even harder to overcome that. So let's get practical here.
Yep.
And David, let's actually break this down. How do we create that courageous culture? Like, what's the first step in creating that courageous culture?
Yeah. So the very first step is start with clarity, and being clear about 2 things. One is that you absolutely really want their ideas. And 2, clarity about what a good idea would accomplish. So this is where you get very specific about, hey, we need ideas in this arena. So we're working with a team right now, and so he wants to create a courageous culture. I'm saying, well, don't just say you want ideas. Give me 5 areas that you really want ideas. And so he's given us, one of the areas is around diversity and inclusion and really getting people's best thinking on that. The next is around how do you do employee engagement at a time like this? And then he had 3 that were very specific tactical business challenges that he has. And so then all the work we'll be doing with his team is around these 5 areas. And you already have a good start on that because he's been specific. Now, other ideas might emerge during this time, but if you can get people practicing with specific areas of the business that you want to improve, that's the really good place to start.
And one of the specific tools that you can use to do that is what we call a courageous question. And a courageous question differs from a regular, hey, if you've got ideas on how we can be better, I'm all ears. It's different than that. It's intentional and it has two characteristics. It's very specific and it's vulnerable. And so the specificity is, so for instance, let's say you've got a distributed workforce right now. We need every idea on how we can improve employee engagement with a distributed workforce. So how we can be more engaging, how we can maintain our culture, how we can create that energy. And we've had a number of clients that's top of mind, which is why that question would be asked. But the other aspect of a courageous question is that it's vulnerable. It assumes improvement is possible. So it's not, hey, if you think improvement is possible, then have the courage to come and talk to me and make your case. No. It's, as a leader, I'm assuming improvement is possible. And I'd like you to share your thoughts on how we can get there.
Yeah. So for example, we talk with Don Yeager in the book, and he's the COO at Mural Consulting, and he goes out regularly and says, what are our policies that suck? And so that's vulnerable, right? I assume we have policies that are ticking off our customers. So what are they? Right? And so that creates for a very easy conversation. Or you could say, what is one thing that's ticking off our customers? Well, we all have one idea. And then once somebody says that idea, then you could say, thank you. What else? And now you have a dialogue.
Where is one area in our organization right now that we can improve our approach to racial equity? That's specific and it's vulnerable. Assumes improvement is possible.
Wow. That's a different way of thinking about vulnerability than we normally think about with our leaders. Often we're expecting them to be vulnerable and they're concerned because it feels like incompetence, right? Hey, I screwed this up or this didn't go well. So where did you get this definition of vulnerability? Because it's new to me and I can't imagine anybody listening that it isn't new to them as well.
We talk in the book about navigating the narrative. And the idea here, we know that you're friends with Seth Godin. You've had him on the show before. He has our favorite definition of culture, is that people like us do things like this. So in a courageous culture, if people like us are showing up and speaking up on behalf of the customer and on behalf of the employee experience, and that's the norm, then it's a paradox. It takes less courage for everyone to do that if it's happening. But someone has to go first. And that's where leadership comes in. And so one of the things that we invite leaders to do is to think about their own experiences and the places where they have had courage. We're fond of asking leaders, what's your most courageous act in your career? And we'll ask, when we speak at conferences or online or wherever we might be engaging, to ask them that and hear what they say. And it's funny, you watch what happens when people do that. They smile, they sit up straighter, they tap into that and go, okay, I can do this. I can lead with courage in this moment. Because here's the thing, your people are never going to speak up if they can't see you doing it. If you're leading a team or a company and you're not advocating on behalf of your employees or your customers or talking to your boss or your board or whoever it is with confidence, you set the tone. So they're not going to follow if that's not happening.
Awesome. I love that. That does take vulnerability. That does take courage. And that does take intentionality. We have to do that on purpose. That doesn't happen accidentally. So we have that great culture, right? We're getting there. We ask those courageous questions, really important. The leader goes first. Okay, so leader's gone first. But what happens if my boss isn't on board? What happens if my boss isn't that one, right? I mean, you said that there's definitely a disconnect between leadership and the front line. So what happens if my boss isn't courageous? What happens if I still want to be courageous as a frontline manager?
It's a perfect question. And we have several examples in the book of managers who do what we call build a cultural oasis, which is you concentrate on your own sphere of influence. You say the way people like us are going to act on my team is that we're going to speak up, we're going to share ideas. This is how I'm going to behave with my peers. Right? And so that you work. And here's the thing about all that. You will get the results. And then the results continue to buy you additional freedom to lead that way. You want to share about Jamie and the work
Sure,
that he
yeah.
did?
So in our discussions, one of the deep dives that we did in the research, working with different clients, was with a international engineering organization that very, very high speed transactional, not the most human-centered culture. But Jamie was a manager who at one point in his career looked at the group that he was talking with at a leadership meeting and said, we've got to do a better job of connecting managers to their people and helping them lead in a human-centered way. And I've got some thoughts about that. And the people at the table said, oh, go for it. See what you can do. And so the first thing he did was he went and found 3 other like-minded folks. And together, the 4 of them started brainstorming. They eventually built a grassroots community of practice for managers and leaders in this company who are committed to a human-centered leadership. And they've got half of the managers in that company now in one country of that company who have voluntarily joined this group. And so when we talked with Jamie about this, we said, Jamie, if you were talking to other leaders at another organization who might feel like they're all alone, who feel like the company their boss isn't on board for this kind of approach or building, a courageous culture, what would you tell them? But they've got it burning in them. He said, oh, that's easy. The number one thing I recommend, find the others. There are other people in your company. And if you can't find them in your company, find them in other communities, find them online, find them, connecting with people like us or yourself. Like there are people who are committed to these things and they're out there. You don't have to do this journey alone.
And I think one of the other things I think that is interesting is there's more likely a lot more support that's out there than you might think there is. Yeah. So I was teaching at it was a large government agency, and I had been doing a long-term leadership program. This was the 3rd year that I've been involved with it. And every time I would go in, I would hear these stories, and they were heart-wrenching stories where people had been shut down. And, so giving them the courage to apply these tools and find the others. But what was very interesting is after one of the programs, this woman said, I'm going to submit you to come to speak at our all big series. And I'm trying to not disclose who this is, but this big series. And do you know, I'm like, oh yeah, they had some really, really famous people. I'm like, they're never going to call, but they did. And they said, your message on courageous cultures is exactly what we need here, And so, I think there's more receptivity. And so then talking at the very senior level, they said, yes, we need people speaking up. But the culture had been going on for so long and the history had been so long, even though senior leadership were willing to make this one of their biggest priorities and communicate that as one of the most important things, it takes time for that culture to change.
Yeah. Phil, there's another aspect of this that I think is important when you're talking about, well, what if my boss isn't on board? And I think we all feel that at some level. And so one of the tools that we equip both leaders and individual contributors with is the ability to contribute ideas that have a much greater chance of getting traction and being used. Because we know from our work with leaders, there's like almost nobody takes a leadership role, becomes a manager because they want to screw people over or cause them harm. Everybody's doing the best they can. And so the tool that we use to help people contribute ideas, to vet their ideas, and to give them the best chance of getting traction is called the IDEA model. And IDEA is an acronym.
So it starts for I. Is it interesting? So we ask people to say, why do you think your idea is interesting? Well, what does it align with? Oh, it's interesting because it aligns with this question that you told us we need to answer, or it aligns with the strategic initiative. D, is it doable? Meaning, is this something we could actually do? This is particularly important right now because there's so much going on. Could we pull this off in the next 6 months? E, is it engaging? Meaning, who else would think this is a good idea, right? Who are your stakeholders? Who else do we need to get on board? And A, come with a couple of key actions that you would recommend as our next steps. And when we use this, you can do this so quickly. Say, I need ideas around this. When you're vetting your ideas to figure out which one is the best, run it through this idea model. And we've been doing this in our live online sessions. And in like 45 minutes, people come up with great ideas.
Wow. I love that, Karin. That's so good, right? Interesting, doable, engaging, and actions. And especially the engaging part, to your point that, David, you made really well. And that is, we have more support than we expect. So when we can, right, we can enlist that inside, outside an organization. Maybe you're part of an association. If you don't have anybody inside your organization that can do that, or, maybe there's some people on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook in a group that you can take advantage of or something like that. I'm curious, on that note, Do you have a Courageous Cultures group that people can join and participate in at all?
So we have been doing a lot of work with these live online idea inspiration rallies. And we have another one coming. And so we've been doing them with associations. We've been doing them with companies. And
got a public one that everybody can join.
On July 23rd at 1 Eastern. And you can come and we'll share with you some of these really practical tools and help you figure out some ideas that are emerging from this crisis right now that you could immediately apply.
Awesome. Cool. So, well, where do they get that, Karin, before I go on with
questions? So if you go to our website, courageousculturesbook.com, all the information is there.
Oh, cool. Okay, good. I'll make sure that I share a link to that. So
Great.
That really wasn't a setup. I really didn't know. So honest. So that's interesting. So very cool. Okay, fantastic. So good. So lots of stuff there. Good. Let's keep going here. I've just got a couple more questions that I want to talk about. And I think some of this has to have a little bit of definition here. When you talk about building courageous teams, you've got some different groups here. You've got three big ones. You've got a micro innovator, a problem solver, and a customer advocate. So David, if you can start, tell me about the micro innovator. What does that mean? And then Karin, I'm going to go to you, and then either one of you can take the
Sure thing. Advocate. When we think about innovation, so often you think about a senior executive doing a massive blue ocean strategy. What's the big, huge innovation that nobody's doing? It's going to be the game changer for our industry or business. And that's good. And we need those. And courageous cultures can help produce those. But what we're talking about with micro innovations are the day-to-day enhancements that improve a process, the customer experience, the employee experience. There are those little efficiencies that somebody recognizes because they're very close to the work. And so our frontline folks or leaders, whoever, at whatever level, what is it right in front of you that can be better? And when people are thinking about it that way, well, here's that little enhancement. And it's just this one thing I do. Well, if we could scale that, if we could capture those and get those replicated throughout the business, throughout the organization, how much more effective would we be? How much more valued is the person feeling now that they know that their innovations matter and that it was valuable enough to get it? And then how much better is everybody off because they're benefiting from that micro innovation themselves?
Yeah. And so when you think about problem solvers, this is where you're teaching your team to answer the question, how can we? And so you're bringing to them very tactical, practical business challenges and say, how can we? And so, for example, in our organization, the last 4 months has been, how can we do live programs, and that we're going to be in hotels and face-to-face and in companies, and how can we give a best-in-class experience that will still help people to achieve all those outcomes and do it live online, right? And so that isn't just a question that David and I were asking. So we asked people involved who support our curriculum. We've asked our administration. All the people on our team have been coming together asking those how can we questions, which because of all of that, that's what enabled us to do the fast pivot. And so right now, there's so many how can we questions. You're working with one contact center, and they had been absolutely against. We will never have agents working from home. I mean, that was like in their core. That's what no, we don't do that. Well, guess what? They had to do it, and they had to do it fast. And they made a pivot in 5 days, asking that question: how can we have the security that made us nervous? How can we have the responsiveness? How can we ensure quality? How can we deal with the schedules when people still have the kids running around, right? And they have not only survived, they have grown their business during that time, which now, of course, is going to completely shift their approach to, even if there was a vaccine and they could all go back, their model will never be 100% back in the office.
So the common thread through your micro innovators, your problem solvers, and your customer advocates is initiative. It's people see these things and they take initiative. And so customer advocacy is the same thing, is speaking up on behalf of the customer experience and looking for how we go about improving that. And so, there are so many different aspects where this is vital right now for companies and businesses and nonprofits and educational institutions who are trying to figure out, okay, the world is different. We can't serve our customers the way we used to. How can we question, how can we continue to contribute our value to our customers? And so that question is more important right now than maybe it's ever been before in contemporary history.
Yeah, let me give you a good example of customer advocates. This is my favorite example in the book, probably because it's from my sister. But so Jill is a director of rehab at WellSpan Hospital. And she said, Karin, I think we do what you're talking about. And I said, well, what do you do? And she says, so when we have a big strategic decision to make, we always designate one person in the meeting to act only on and think only on behalf of the patient. And so she said, for example, we were implementing a new scheduling system, and the idea was to make the scheduling transparent so that, like, if her team was going in to do rehab, but somebody else was going in to do testing, neither one of them would find an empty room. They always knew where the patients were. And so that would increase productivity. So they're talking about implementing this, and the guy who was acting on the behalf of the patient in this meeting raised his hand. And he said, I want to know my schedule too. And she said, they all went, oh no, right? This is a hospital. Things change all the time. This is good. He said, no, I get it. Get it. This is a hospital. There's going to be emergencies. But even if it's 80% correct, I already have cancer. I'm feeling out of control. This would give me a sense of control. I would know when it would be best for my wife to be here and when she doesn't have to be here, so she doesn't have to feel like she's here all the time. And she said they took that advice. So that's the patient's perspective, the customer advocate, right? And she said it's not perfect, but it has significantly increased their patient satisfaction scores.
Wow. That's interesting, right? That intentionality of putting one person in that position to see it from the customer's point of view, instead of making everybody do that, which we'd hope that they would, but that means nobody does, right? It's like when you send an email to 178 people and nobody replies, except for those two jokers who reply all and say, take me off the list. Right? Those are people we don't like, right? But so that's really interesting. I like that intentionality of doing that. And that definitely takes customer focus, and that definitely takes that advocacy piece, and it takes, to your word, initiative. Really, really important. So I'm looking behind you here, and I see 4 cool posters here. Those posters have anything to do with your book?
Yes, they do.
They might, just a little bit.
So on your left, you have Navigate the Narrative, and that is really, how do you get in touch with your own feelings around fear? What is scaring you? How do you have those kinds of conversations? And how do you tap into your past moments of courage to give you more courage for the future?
And we've got Cultivate Curiosity, which gets at what we were mentioning earlier around asking courageous questions and the patient perspective and all the different ideas of how you surface and how you draw in the ideas from every member of your team or organization.
And Galvanizing the Genius is all about building an infrastructure for courage. So how are you recruiting? How are you bringing people in? What are you doing in your onboarding? How are you rewarding? How are you tying in micro innovation and recognition into your performance management process?
And then all the communication techniques that go with it. Because one of the challenges you'll hear sometimes in organizations is, I've got too many ideas and it's crazy, it's chaos. Well, one of the things that we discovered is that when you're building a courageous culture, there is what we call an elegant dance between clarity and curiosity. And so we recommend organizations start where they aren't. So if you've got a high clarity organization, it's time to introduce some curiosity and get curious and start asking these questions. But if you've got a high curiosity culture, you may need some clarity, and then galvanizing the genius and getting your systems and your communications and the way that you're implementing those things rolled out is going to help. And then that leads into the art of accountability, which is in any organization, your ability to feel safe and feel productive is a direct function of the degree to which trust exists, performance exists, and accountability factors into all those things. Can we rely on one another to keep our word? Is this a safe environment where we're not tolerating any of the toxic courage crushers, any of the harassment, or any of those kinds of things that are just non-starters? You can't build a courageous culture if you're tolerating any of that. So these are just a few of the elements that help contribute to a courageous culture. We've got more posters. That's just 4 of them.
Cool. That's awesome. That's really cool. So do you have them in PDF or something on the website here at Courageous Culture's book, or how do we get those posters?
We'll get them to you.
Cool, because they are really cool. I really dig that, right? I mean, a visual representation of what's going on in the book is really helpful. I mean, we need those reminders. You said, start where you aren't, David. I think that's fascinating advice and certainly smart, right? Instead of just going full speed at what we're already good at, let's start where we're not. Let's improve that. Let's make that better. I think that's great. Your idea of vulnerability is great, right? I want your idea. Here's what it would accomplish, right? Have that clarity around that. Have those like-minded folks. So much good stuff. So if we were to add one more piece, one more nugget, Karin, first from you and then from David, one more nugget is we're either getting started or maybe if we hit a speed bump along with this, what would it be?
Yeah, when in doubt, be the courageous leader that you want your boss to be.
Awesome.
And I'm going to go with an expanded nugget because I think that this is key to getting all of this to work. You can ask for ideas, but there's more to it than that. So we were working with a large financial institution, and they have a really robust way for soliciting employee ideas and suggestions, and hundreds of them every month. And we asked one of the executives how it was going. He said, well, it's interesting. 50% of the ideas we get have already been implemented. They're underway or we're already doing it. We said, well, that's great. People must feel like energized. Their voices heard. He said, in our internal surveys, not so much. We said, well, that's interesting. So how are you going back to people and closing the circle and saying, listen, your idea was so good. We're already doing it. And he said, oh, you know what? We're not. And so if you think about the research that we already shared, how are those people now feeling? Well, I took the time to submit my idea, and here's how I think we can improve. And what did I get? Deafening silence. And so now it just reinforced they're not going to take my idea seriously. They ask, but they don't really mean it. They're stuck in their ways. And all of those negative perceptions and the psychological tendency to safe silence, all of it has been reinforced. So one of the things that we encourage and invite every leader to do is what we call respond with regard. And there are 3 specific ways that you do that. Any kind of idea you get from people, you want to maintain that momentum. You want to keep the ideas flowing. Start with gratitude, information, and invitation. And here's what it looks like in practice. So that gentleman who was getting ideas they'd already implemented, gratitude. Hey, thank you so much for contributing that idea. I'm so happy that you're thinking about how we can improve. Information. Hey, listen, that idea was so good. We're already doing it. And here's where you can learn more about that. Invitation. Listen, we have this strategic priority of improving our response time for customers. I would love to get your thinking on how we might be able to do that. Okay. Gratitude, information, invitation. Same thing works if somebody contributes an idea that either isn't fully formed or you can't even use it right now. Hey, thank you for thinking about this with us. I appreciate you taking the time and energy and speaking up. You get more of what you encourage and celebrate. Add information. So the idea that you contributed, we tried something like it last year, and here's what we found. We ran into this department has a competing priority that we've got to make sure that they're able to achieve. And then also we had some resourcing constraints that we never did figure out how to overcome those. So listen, if you could help us figure out a way to do both, I love where you're going with that invitation. Would love to hear your ideas on how we might do that. And so regardless of the kind of idea you're getting, gratitude, information, invitation is going to maintain people's momentum, keep the energy flowing, and keep those ideas coming.
Wow. That's a great way to close us down here with the gratitude with information and invitation. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, gang. So you've got some cool bonuses with the book. It comes out at the end of July. So folks, you still have time to get in on the pre-order, which is good. So what do folks get if they go to courageousculturesbook.com?
So you can, even if you don't pre-order it, you can download the first couple of chapters and the foreword by Amy Edmondson. And then as you pre-order, the bonus is we have an idea incubator guide, which is it walks you through with really practical tools to get the best ideas from your team right now. And of course, you are invited to come to our Idea Inspiration Summit on July 23rd. And so you'll learn more about how to use the book. And then once you buy the book, it also comes with an executive strategy guide that takes you through the entire process with your team so that you can read the book together and work through it and apply it.
We really encourage you to stop with each chapter and use what it is you're reading and learning. You're going to get the most value out of it by doing it.
Awesome. That's so good. So much good stuff there. CourageousCultureBook.com. Fantastic work. Fantastic book. Got some great comments here. We've got some stuff from Susan Robb here about leadership is situational. Have those performance conversations, right? When trust is high, productivity is high. That's great, right? Catch someone doing something right. That's great. Consuela talks about finding the others and thinks that everyone's had an idea stolen. Heck yes. So let's go. Let's stop doing that. Let's build a courageous culture. Spend some time, folks. Get a copy of the book. Karin, David, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Bill, it's always a pleasure. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you too, my friends. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.